Landlords often blame tenants when things go wrong. It's easy. Tenants are visible, emotional, and make for convenient targets. But here's the thing, tenants aren't the real risk. The system is. This is the crucial misdiagnosis that costs landlords dearly in the long run. Let me tell you an uncomfortable truth. Bad tenants are a temporary problem. Bad laws are permanent. The moment you find yourself on the wrong side of a regulation, your property stops feeling like an asset. It transforms into a liability you can no longer control. Many landlords make the mistake of thinking that ownership equals authority. It doesn't. In today's rental market, ownership often means all the responsibility with none of the power. You're expected to provide quality housing, keep everything maintained, and follow a mountain of regulations. You're supposed to absorb any and all delays. But when a problem actually arises, your options vanish. Evictions can drag on for months, even years. Non-payment becomes a long, drawn-out battle. All the while, legal costs are piling up, and guess what? Your expenses don't take a break. The mortgage is still due, the property taxes still have to be paid, and the insurance company still wants its premium. This is where the psychological pressure really starts to build. It's that sinking feeling when a landlord realizes their cash flow is entirely dependent on people and policies they have zero control over. That single realization changes your entire mindset. You stop seeing rent as reliable income. Instead, you start seeing it as conditional income. And let me tell you, conditional income is a recipe for stress. Think about the imbalance here. A tenant can stop paying rent and still continue to live in your property. A landlord, on the other hand, can't stop paying their mortgage, taxes, or insurance. That fundamental asymmetry is a huge deal. It forces landlords into a purely defensive position. Instead of planning for growth and expansion, they're stuck planning for damage control. They build up cash reserves not to buy more properties, but just to survive the inevitable delays and non-payment issues. And operating from a place of survival is an expensive way to live. Here is something most small landlords don't figure out until it gets far too late. The system wasn't built for them. It was designed for large corporate institutions. Those big players can easily absorb a few months of vacancy. They can afford to delay profits. They have entire legal teams on standby. The small landlord doesn't have any of those luxuries. For them, one bad tenant isn't just an emotional drain, it's a structural blow to their entire financial stability. Why? Because their profit margins are razor thin and their entire investment is concentrated in one or two properties. This is exactly why new regulations feel so personal to small landlords. Because they are. Let's get back to the psychology of it all. When the rules of the game are constantly shifting, your brain loses trust in the process. Landlords stop thinking strategically about growth. They start thinking defensively. How do I avoid problems? How can I screen tenants even harder? How do I protect myself from every possible scenario? This constant focus on protection completely replaces any thoughts of progress. And that's the moment when any joy you might have had in being a landlord just disappears. But there's a deeper issue here that nobody really talks about. Landlords aren't angry just because laws and regulations exist. They're angry because the fundamental balance between risk and reward is completely broken. They're carrying all of the long-term, significant risk for a very short-term, unstable return. That's just a bad deal. Your brain knows it's a bad deal, even if your ego doesn't want to admit it. So, what's the result of all this? Landlords become resentful. They become overly cautious and guarded. They stop trusting tenants. They stop trusting the system. And eventually, they stop trusting in the future of their own investment. This is the true origin of landlord burnout. It doesn't come from one single eviction or one new regulation. It comes from the slow, creeping realization that you've lost all control, while all the responsibility still rests squarely on your shoulders. Now there's a hidden cost in all of this that nobody ever calculates, the one that quietly convinces good landlords to just walk away. It's not about the money. It's about their peace of mind. They told you being a landlord was passive income. That's the biggest lie in real estate. Here's the sharper truth. If rental income were truly passive, landlords wouldn't be so burned out, anxious, and quietly angry. And yet, thousands are. This is the illusion that traps most landlords right from the start. You see the rent hit your bank account. Your brain immediately labels it easy money. But what your brain conveniently ignores is everything that surrounds that single payment. The late-night calls. The constant texts. The emergency repairs. The uncertainty. That low-level stress that never really goes away. Passive income doesn't require constant vigilance. Landlording absolutely does. That's the first crack in the illusion. Because the moment you own a rental, you don't just own a property. You inherit responsibility without having any real control. Tenants live there, but you carry all the consequences. And psychologically, that imbalance is a huge deal. Let's be honest. Most landlords didn't get into this for the love of property management. You chose it because you were sold a promise of freedom. The rent will cover the mortgage. It'll pay for itself. It's hands-off once you get it set up. That narrative sells courses and dreams, but reality rarely follows the script. The income might be monthly, but the problems are completely random. And randomness destroys your peace of mind. You can't schedule a water heater to break. You can't predict when a tenant will lose their job and pay late. You can't control how someone else treats a property they don't own. So your brain stays on high alert, always. That's not passive. That's a heavy cognitive load. Now here's the psychological shift that nobody ever talks about. At first, you tolerate the stress because it feels temporary. You tell yourself, it's just this one tenant, or it's just this one expensive repair. You think. It'll all smooth out over time, but it doesn't because rental properties don't stabilize, they accumulate friction. The longer you own it, the more wear and tear, the more tenant interactions, the more exposure you have to risk. Yet the rent check barely scales with all that extra effort. So landlords stop asking, is this giving me the freedom I wanted? And they start asking, how do I manage this stress better? That question signals the trap is sprung. Because management is not freedom, it's just maintenance. Now let's talk about ego, because this is where so many people get stuck. Admitting that landlording is draining feels like admitting you failed. Society frames landlords as winners, as savvy investors, as people who figured it out, so when the stress starts piling up, you don't question the system. You internalize it. You think, maybe I'm just not doing it right, or I just need to be tougher. You convince yourself. This is just the price of building wealth. And that's how burnout becomes normalized. Not because the model actually works, but because you're trying to protect your identity as a successful investor. Here's the quiet truth most landlords won't say out loud. The money comes in, but your peace of mind goes out. You're never fully off the clock. Even when you're on vacation, you're reachable. Even on weekends, you're responsible. Even when nothing is wrong, you're mentally bracing for something to go wrong. That constant state of readiness is a hidden cost, and it compounds over time. Now compare this to actual passive income. Stock dividends don't call you in the middle of the night. Song royalties don't text you about a clogged drain. Index funds don't have plumbing that floods the downstairs unit. Landlording is operational income that's pretending to be passive. And that mismatch is where the frustration and resentment really begin. Your expectations were set up for one thing, but your reality is something else entirely. This is why so many landlords feel constantly irritated without really knowing why. You redoing the demanding work of a full-time manager while believing you're supposed to feel like a relaxed, hands-off owner. That internal conflict never resolves. It just drains your energy. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to admit the original promise was flawed. So you push forward. You try to optimize your systems. You automate messages. You hire a property manager, which just eats into your profits. But the core problem remains. You have all the ownership without any of the control. All the responsibility without any of the rest. That's not a business advantage. That's a psychological tax. In the next video, the illusion breaks completely. Because once you look past the myth of passive income, you'll see what's actually driving landlords out of the game. And I'll tell you right now, it's not the tenants. It's something far more structural, and it's something you need to know. Cash flow is a tricky thing. It can keep you in a game way longer than you should be playing. See, as long as money is coming in, your brain just assumes the trade-off is worth it. This is exactly where most landlords get stuck. They start confusing the profit they see on paper with actual peace in their lives. And that's the real pressure point we need to talk about. Here's a hard truth most landlords want to admit out loud. The rent check might look great every month, but the real cost is paid in your attention, your energy, and your emotional bandwidth. And guess what? Those costs don't show up on any spreadsheet. Every single property you own takes up a slice of your mental real estate. You're always kind of on call, aren't you? Always a little bit alert, always waiting for the next problem to pop up. Even when everything is running smoothly, your nervous system is still engaged, still humming in the background. That's not income. That's what I call cognitive rent. You're paying to keep that property in your head 24/7. Now think about what this does to you over a long period. You stop being able to fully relax. You stop being truly present with your family and friends. You never really feel like you're done for the day. Because ownership without peace is a job that never ever turns off. This is precisely why so many landlords feel completely drained without knowing the reason. They're not necessarily overworked in the traditional sense. They're over-responsible. And here's the psychological trap that keeps them there. As long as the numbers on the spreadsheet look good, landlords feel guilty for even questioning the cost. They tell themselves things like, hey, it's making money, or I really shouldn't complain, or this is just how you build wealth. So what do? They push that discomfort down. But suppressed stress doesn't just vanish into thin air. It accumulates. And that accumulation starts showing up as constant irritability, chronic fatigue, and a general sense of disengagement from your own life. So let's look at this trade-off honestly for a second. If you have an income stream that pays you monthly but demands you always ready for a crisis, that reduces your flexibility to live your life, and that occupies your mental space even when you're on vacation. That's not a passive income stream. It's a parasite on your attention. And your attention is your most finite, most valuable resource. This is why landlords often feel like their world is getting smaller. Vacations aren't really vacations because you're checking your phone for calls from tenants. Weekends aren't really weekends off. Even the good months, where nothing goes wrong, feel fragile. You know that your peace is conditional. It can all be shattered by a single phone call. Now, here's the distinction that can change everything for you. Profit answers one simple question. Is this making me money? But peace answers a much more important one. Is this actually improving my life? So many landlords never get around to asking that second question. They just assume that if the first answer is yes, the second is guaranteed. It's not. In fact, for many small landlords, the profit they make comes directly at the expense of their peace. And over time, that trade-off becomes completely unbearable. This is the point where landlords start fantasizing about an exit strategy. It is not because they suddenly hate money, it's because they miss the simple feeling of being able to breathe. They don't actually want more rent. They want fewer problems, but instead of taking action, they start rationalizing. Oh, it's not that bad. Things will smooth out eventually. I'll feel better once this or that stabilizes. That hope is what keeps them stuck. But here's the reality. Rental properties don't get simpler with time. They get heavier. And here's the moment of silent recognition for most landlords. If they were offered the exact same income, but without any of the stress, they would take that deal in a heartbeat. That tells you everything you need to know. It means the income isn't the real reward they're after. Relief is. In our next video, we're going to expose why so many landlords are quietly exiting the market, not with a big dramatic announcement, but with a deep sense of relief. And we'll talk about why that quiet trend matters more than anyone is admitting. They don't announce it. They don't complain publicly. They don't make dramatic exits. They just leave quietly. This is the reality most people miss. Landlords aren't quitting because they failed. They're quitting because they ran the numbers and felt the weight. This is the silent exit. Let's look at what's really happening beneath the surface. From the outside, small landlords look stable. The properties are occupied, rent is coming in, and there's no obvious crisis. But internally, something has shifted. The mental math no longer works. And I'm not talking about financial math, but life math. They start asking questions they used to avoid. How much longer can I keep doing this? Is this truly worth the stress? What am I actually building here? And when those questions appear, the end has already begun. Because once peace becomes a variable, profit alone can't justify the load. Now, let's talk about the part nobody likes to hear. The game changed, but many landlords didn't. Regulations tightened. Costs rose. Tenants gained more leverage. Margins shrank. Large institutions adapted quickly. Small landlords, on the other hand, absorbed the shock. That difference is critical. Big players spread their risk across hundreds, even thousands of units. One vacancy doesn't really hurt them. But small landlords don't have that luxury. One bad situation can affect everything: their cash flow, their mood, their sleep. This imbalance, this asymmetry, is what slowly pushes people out. Not through a massive loss, but through sheer exhaustion. And here's the key insight. Most of these exits aren't reactive, they're preemptive. Landlords are leaving before things completely break. Because they can feel the direction things are heading. More rules, less control, higher stress. So they decide to sell while it still makes sense. They don't wait for the pain to become unbearable, they listen to the pressure. Now, notice something important. These exits aren't emotional outbursts. They're calm, relief replaces ambition. That's how you know it's real. There's no anger, no bitterness, just clarity. This no longer fits my life. That sentence isn't a sign of defeat. It's a moment of alignment, but publicly, nobody talks about it. Why? Because leaving quietly preserves dignity? And because our society still praises ownership above all else, exiting feels like something you should hide. So the popular narrative stays broken. People think landlords are winning and getting rich, while many are simply done. This creates a dangerous illusion for newcomers. They see all the success stories, but they never hear about the quiet exits. They hear about passive income, but not the relief-driven sell-offs. Survivorship bias keeps the myth alive and well. Here's the most important takeaway from this trend. Landlording isn't collapsing, it's consolidating. Small players are exiting, and large players are expanding. The middle is quietly disappearing. That doesn't mean owning rentals is a bad idea. It just means the cost of playing small has increased significantly. And for many people, that price just isn't worth paying anymore. In the end, it all comes together. Not with a piece of advice, not with a set of instructions, but with one question every landlord eventually has to answer for themselves. And once they do, the path becomes obvious whichever direction they choose. Thanks for watching. If this perspective resonated with you, consider subscribing for more content like this. See you in the next one. Every landlord reaches this moment. It doesn't happen during a crisis or after a disaster. It happens in the quiet pauses when nothing is obviously wrong, and yet something just feels off. This is what I call the final question phase. It's the point where the illusion completely dissolves. Because at this stage, the problem isn't your tenants. It's not the laws. It's not even the money. The real issue is fit. The question is no longer, can I keep doing this? It's do I want too? And that distinction, that single word, changes everything. Most landlords can survive the stress. They've proven that time and again. But survival isn't the goal, is it? Life isn't something to be managed like a liability on a balance sheet. So the real, unavoidable question surfaces. Is this income buying me freedom, or is it costing me my peace of mind? That's the one question no spreadsheet can ever answer for you. And once you ask it honestly, just waiting for things to get better stops working. Now here's the trap that so many fall into at this final stage. They look for a perfect exit signal. A clear sign from the universe. A dramatic reason to leave. They're waiting for permission. But alignment rarely arrives with a burst of fireworks. It arrives quietly as clarity. It's the moment you realize the trade-off just doesn't make sense anymore. The time, the attention, the constant mental load, they're no longer worth the financial return. This doesn't mean being a landlord was a mistake. Not at all. It means it served its purpose for a phase of your life, and that phase has now ended. But many people resist this conclusion because their identity gets tangled up in it. I'm a landlord. I'm an investor. I built this portfolio. Walking away feels like erasing all that effort. But effort isn't the metric we should be using. Trajectory is. And here's the final truth that most people never hear. Holding on too long doesn't prove your strength. It proves your attachment. Real strength is knowing when it's time to redesign your life, and redesign can mean many things. It can mean restructuring your portfolio. It could mean simplifying your operations, delegating more tasks, or even exiting the business entirely. All of these are valid options. The only invalid option is staying misaligned with what you truly want. Now, take a step back and look at the pattern. The landlords who decide to leave aren't weaker than the ones who stay. They're clearer. They've made a conscious choice. They choose fewer problems over more pride. They choose peace over perpetual vigilance. They choose having a life over just managing one. That choice isn't failure, it's evolution. And evolution always looks like quitting to those who don't understand it. So let's bring this to a close, not with a call to action, but with a mirror. I want you to ask yourself this. If you stripped away your ego, your identity as an investor, and all the expectations you and others have placed on you, If you looked only at how this role truly affects your days, your energy, and your peace, would you still choose this structure? If the answer is a resounding yes, then own it fully. Double down and make it the best it can be. But if the answer is no, then you have to honor that truth. Because clarity is the real asset you've been working for. And once you have it, the decision makes itself. That's where the game actually ends. Thanks for watching.